Okay. So let's move to the next topic, which is taking advantage of multiple CPUs, more virtualization. We've just virtualized the network interface card. How about virtualizing the operating system? And if you were here for Bill's presentation this morning, or he talked a little bit about zones or containers, and essentially what Solaris allows you to do, if you're familiar with virtualization, traditional hypervisors allow you to run another instance of an operating system on the bare metal. Well, this is different. This is operating system virtualization. So within Solaris, you can create other instances of Solaris. Extremely lightweight, extremely efficient. You can create hundreds of these instances on your machine. Once you create these instances, I have an example on the next page, but you can then do resource management on them. So let's say you have a big machine. It's got 24 CPUs and 20 gigs of memory or some crazy number of memory. You can then say, I want this zone to have access to only 4 CPUs and only 4 gigs of memory. And I want this zone to have access to 8 CPUs and 8 gigs of memory, or stuff like that. So you can do resource management, and you'll hear people use the term container. And really, we use them kind of synonymously. If you want to get technical about it, a zone is essentially a container without any resource management. Or I should say, we call something a container once you add resource management to it. But don't get hung up around that. People use those terms really interchangeably. Don't worry about it. But what I've done here is sort of drawn up sort of an example of how you might use zones. And I used General Electric as a concept. If you're familiar with GE, they own a lot of companies. And I said, you know what? They could theoretically have some big server that hosts GE.com. And then they decide they're going to allocate a zone to each of their different groups. And so there's appliances, healthcare, lighting. They own broadcasting corporations, all kinds of stuff, medical. And then within those zones, they could assign the zone to each of those groups, and then those groups are off and running. They say, here, as far as that group's concerned, it's like their own machine. It has its own IP address, its own login, and then they can do what they want within that zone. They can install their own software. But the key is, this VNIC technology I just showed you really empowers this concept. And so as I said, most servers that you can buy, as far as I know, do not have more than like 4 physical NICs in them. So how would you create something with 20 zones, which is not by any means uncommon? If we were a classroom and you were all my students and I was trying to teach you Solaris, I would very likely create a zone for each one of you. And I guarantee my laptop could probably handle that. They're that efficient. Now, what I couldn't do is give each one of you your own network interface card until Crossbow came about. Now I could create VNICs for each of you and assign each of that to the zones, and now you have full control over your network stack, and you can really do what you want. All right, so let's create a zone. Let's see. You use the zone config command to create a zone. What did I do? Zone config. What? Okay, I didn't need to specify create. Now, the zone creation command is an interactive process. It's going to walk me through a series of questions. What do you want to call the zone? Things like that. Not too many, but what I've done instead, there we go, is put the configuration information into a file. Man. Or I thought I did. What am I doing here? Let's see. Am I running? I am running the wrong virtual machine for this demo. So let me power off this machine. And let me start this machine up. So in preparation for this demo, I told you I was using a VirtualBox virtual machine. So what I've done is installed Open Solaris into this virtual machine, and I've just done some prep work for these demos. I created some configuration files that I can use to create these zones and so forth. So give me a second. Let me start up this machine. This will only take a couple of minutes. If you haven't seen VirtualBox before, this is kind of cool. The machine is actually in what we call a saved state. And so it's actually like consider it's like coming out of hibernation. It only takes a couple of seconds. It's fully functional now, up and running. Okay, so this is what I'm going to show you, the zone configuration file. It just has the zone path where it's going to create the zone. This is a ZFS data set that's going to be created for me, which is why I needed to introduce ZFS first. The IP type is exclusive. And I'm going to assign, it wants to know, okay, what physical NIC are you going to assign to this zone? Well, I'm going to assign my zone 0 as the physical NIC. Do I have a physical NIC called my zone 0 on my machine right now? No, I don't. I have, let's look what I have. I have config -A. I have E1000G0 and the loopback adapter. And so the first thing I need to do is create a virtual network interface card over the physical one, E1000G0, called my zone 0. Now that I've done that, I can create the zone. Okay, so I'm calling the same command I called before. Instead, I'm passing it the configuration file. And so that ran, and now I can run and I can see the zones on my system. Now I have the global zone. All of you have this. If any of you install Solaris or Open Solaris, you will see the global zone. That's always there. And then there's my zone that I just created. Notice it's in a configured state. It hasn't been installed yet. The next step is to install it. And to do that, I would run install. That'll take a couple of seconds. Remember I showed you the ZFS clone command a couple of minutes ago? Well, I can actually use that in the case of zones. And so you see there's another zone here called base zone. Well, I installed that ahead of time to use as a template for creating future zones. And so instead of running install, I can say clone base zone. And that just takes a couple of seconds. Now if we list, we see my zone is now installed and ready to go. And just one thing I want to show you really quick, if I do a ZFS list, you see there are a couple new file systems. Base zone was already there, but my zone was just created. Now I didn't run any ZFS commands. This is all happening underneath the cover via the zone admin commands. It's using ZFS to manage the zones. So now that I have the zone, I can boot it. And then I can log into it. Capital C? Is that what it is? Yes, there it is. And now the zone's booting, and it's going to go through a one-time system configuration command. Again, if you were in my last presentation when I installed Solaris 10, we pretty much did the exact same thing. So it's going to ask me, actually I'm going to cancel out of that. Let me see if I can. Yes, there we go. And I can pre-configure that as well. And so if I look at, I can do I can ready the zone, and then I have what's called a Sis Id Config file. This file contains all the questions that the Sis Id configuration was going to ask me. It wants to know the interface. There's my zone 0. What IP address do you want to use? What's your root password going to be? What time zone are you going to use? So what I can do is copy this file to the ZFS file system. Zones. There we go. Now when I boot the zone or log into the zone, you're right, I do have to reboot the zone. Thank you. Halt, I think. OK, there it goes. So now it's going through its configuration. It found host name, my zone. And so this will take a couple of seconds. I'll let that do its thing. Won't take too long, but I'm going to go back. We're running out of time, so I definitely want to get to the rest of the presentation. And I conclude